Internet.
Action!
Action!
In our headlines on this Thursday, June 4th, here in South Korea, the ruling Democratic Party wins the majority of the 16 mayoral and gubernatorial races nationwide, but loses the Seoul contest to the main opposition, People Power Party. And with regard to the parliamentary by-elections, the ruling party wins 9 out of the 14 vacant seats at the National Assembly, while the main opposition party takes 4 seats. Meanwhile, the Lee Jae-myung administration celebrates its first anniversary at the top office against the backdrop of a stock market boom and a steady presence at the global diplomatic table. We start here at home with the results of the local elections. The ruling party won most of the 16 races, but the opposition party managed to maintain its grip on capital Seoul. Our political correspondent An Sung-jin starts us off.
After a fierce race between political parties, Korea's local elections came to an end. Of the 16 metropolitan and gubernatorial races, the ruling Democratic Party took over 12 regions, while the main opposition People Power Party won 4, marking a shift in the local political landscape from 4 years ago. Out of the key battlegrounds, Seoul came as a neck-and-neck race. After a razor-thin race that went down to the final stage of counting, Seoul mayor race concluded with the PPP's incumbent mayor Oh Se-hoon becoming the capital's first 5-term mayor, as his DP opponent conceded.
Voters have reaffirmed the principle of checks and balances, safeguarding Seoul's democracy.
I humbly accept the voters' verdict. I fell short, and I take full responsibility.
Looking at other key battlegrounds, the DP's Jeon Jae-soo secured Busan over the PPP's incumbent mayor Park Hyung-jun. Have a listen to his victory speech.
As mayor, I will work even harder to earn the trust and support of Busan residents for the Democratic Party to get the city moving again.
The PPP secured 4 regions, with Daegu, which had initially projected a close result during the exit polls, seeing the Conservatives maintain their grip on the city, with the PPP's Chu Kyung-ho defeating the DP's Kim Bu-kyum.
I believe this outcome may reflect voters' desire for Daegu to serve as a greater check and balance to counterweight the Democratic Party government.
With wins in the majority of areas, the overall outcome strengthens the ruling DP's grip on power from the national level down to local governments. For the PPP, who had campaigned on a message of holding the government accountable, defeat in many swing regions is likely to spark debate over responsibility and the party's future direction. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And the results of the parliamentary by-elections also saw the ruling party standing at the forefront of the races as it won 9 out of the 14 vacant seats. Our National Assembly correspondent Moon Hae-ryun reports.
Korea's ruling Democratic Party has emerged from a nationwide vote with its parliamentary majority intact, holding off a conservative challenge in a series of by-elections held across the country. The Democratic Party won 9 of 14 seats up for grabs, while the Conservative People Power Party took 4 and 1 went to an independent. The results reinforce the Democratic Party's dominant position in the National Assembly, where it already holds an absolute majority. The most closely watched race was in Busan's northern Bukgu district, where Han Dong-un, a former leader of the People Power Party who ran as an independent, secured a narrow victory.
I sincerely thank the people of Bukgu for this historic victory.
and for helping open the door to the district's future and the rebuilding of conservatism.
Han's win is seen as significant. It keeps him in national politics and raises questions about the future direction of Korea's fractured conservative camp, which has been in turmoil since the short-lived declaration of martial law by former President Yoon Suk-yeol. In Incheon's Gyeongbi district, long considered the Democratic Party's stronghold, the party's candidate Kim Nam-jun won comfortably.
With your support behind us, I will make sure President Lee delivers on the promises he made. I said it throughout the campaign, and I'm committed to seeing them through.
The seat had fallen vacant after President Lee Jae-myung, who had represented the constituency, won last year's presidential election. Kim, a former presidential spokesman, pledged to carry forward the president's agenda for the area, including transport infrastructure improvements. Gyeongbi has returned a Democratic Party representative in 7 of the last 8 parliamentary elections. Perhaps the most dramatic result of the night came from Pyeongtaek-bi in Gyeonggi-do Province, where People Power Party veteran Yu Dong defeated both the Democratic Party's candidate and Cho-guk, the leader of the smaller Progressive Rebuilding Korea Party, in a 3-way race.
I'd like to once again express my sincere gratitude to the people of Pyeongtaek for allowing me to serve in this role.
Cho's defeat is a significant blow to his party and is expected to complicate ongoing merger talks between the Rebuilding Korea Party and the Democratic Party. Overall, the by-election results mean the Democratic Party and its allies have more than 180 seats in the 300-seat National Assembly, enough to fast-track legislation and override filibusters, ensuring the ruling party retains firm control of the legislative agenda. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
The 2026 local elections and the parliamentary by-elections witnessed a remarkable voter turnout, and this reality in turn led to a halt in voting at some polling stations here in Seoul amid a shortage of ballot papers. Our Park Jun-han has details.
Following record-high early voting turnout last week, over 27.2 million people cast their ballots in Korea's June 3rd local elections, out of approximately 44.6 million eligible voters. That brings the final voter turnout to 61%. Not only is this a 10.1 percentage point jump from the previous local elections 4 years ago, but it's also the highest turnout since the first local elections in 1995, which saw 68.4%. Progressive voters were strongly mobilized following the then-President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law and impeachment, while conservative voters cast their ballots to evaluate the current Lee Jae-myung administration and keep the majority party in check. By region, Jeonnam Gwangju United Special City saw the highest turnout at 65.7%, followed closely by Gangwon-do Province at 64.5% and Gyeongsang-namdo Province at 64.4%. The capital Seoul was above the national average at 63.6%. However, there were issues at 14 polling stations in Seoul, including in the Songpa-gu and Gangnam-do districts, where voting was paused due to a lack of ballot papers. At least one station in Songpa-gu district remained open until 10 p.m. as officials worked to address the problem. The National Election Commission's Secretary General Ho Chol-hoon issued a public apology for the confusion and pledged measures to prevent a recurrence. In response to the issue, the Blue House urged the National Election Commission, as the constitutional body responsible for protecting citizens' voting rights, to ensure there are no disruptions to voting or vote counting in affected areas. The Blue House added that it is closely monitoring the situation. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
The Lee Jae-myung administration today marks its first anniversary at the top office. And in light of this occasion, our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young spoke to a European scholar who believes South Korea should now consider tangible contributions to global governance given its growing presence at the table. Do take a listen.
1 year into President Lee Jae-myung's pragmatic diplomacy, there is growing demand for Korea's partnership in an increasingly divided world. That's according to Arnaud Levaux, president of Paris-based Asia Center. Under the Lee administration, pragmatic diplomacy has meant pursuing national interests through practical cooperation while broadening Korea's diplomatic options in an increasingly fragmented world.
The key word is adaptation. President Lee inherited a very difficult international environment The rivalry between the United States and China continues to intensify. Conflict in Europe, like in Ukraine and in the Middle East, Iran, and the Red Sea are affecting global stability.
Over the past year, Seoul has kept close coordination with Washington and Tokyo while expanding engagement with Europe, India, Africa, and other emerging partners. Laval says that makes Korea valuable to countries looking for more flexible forms of cooperation.
Middle powers do not want to be forced into binary choices. They want to maintain strong alliances while preserving enough autonomy to defend their own interest. The second challenge is economic security. For decades, globalization was mostly about efficiency. Today, it's also about resilience. Many countries today are looking for alternatives to rigid bloc politics. They want flexible partnerships, focus on practical cooperation. And Korea is particularly well positioned to play this role.
President Lee made his diplomatic debut at last year's Group of Seven summit in Canada soon after taking office, and has also been invited this year to the leaders' meeting in France. With that, Laval says Korea will be expected to bring more than symbolic participation.
This invitation is not only for protocol, it's not for pictures, it's not for etiquette. It's because we believe that Korea can really contribute to the global governance. And we are expecting President Lee to have some concrete proposals. Korea is increasingly present in international debates on security, technology, and governance. I will say that the world already sees Korea as a global actor, while maybe Korea do not perceive itself as a global actor yet. So the question should be how Korea can use this growing influence.
As Lee enters his second year in office, Laval says the question is no longer only whether Korea has a seat at the table of global governance, but what it makes of it. Seong, Arirang News.
On the economic front, the Lee Jae-myung administration's policies over the past 1 year have led to remarkable advances in the local stock market, in the field of AI and in crisis management. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon explains.
President Lee's most visible economic achievement over the past 12 months can be seen in the KOSPI. His focus on the market was clear from day one, choosing the Korea Exchange as the very first place to visit.
대한민국 주식시장은 여러분들 아시는 것처럼 너무 불공정하고 불투명하고 다른 나라 사람들이 보면 저 시장을 어떻게 믿냐 이렇게 생각될 정도 아닙니까?
When the administration assumed office last June, the index was at the 2,700 level. It is now trading near the 8,500 mark, an increase of roughly 214% in just 1 year. Korea's stock market capitalization has jumped from 13th to 7th globally. The vertical climb is heavily driven by explosive global demand for AI memory chips, as performance by Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix surged. The government backed this momentum by allocating 10.1 trillion won, or roughly $7.4 billion to push the nation into the top 3 global AI powers. The administration also faced immediate external and internal crises. Following the economic contraction from the December 3rd martial law incident, the government passed a 31.8 trillion won, or roughly $23.3 billion supplementary budget last July, injecting liquidity through widespread consumption coupons. When the Middle East war erupted in February, blocking the Strait of Hormuz and sending international oil prices past $100 a barrel, the government executed a 26.2 trillion won, or $19.2 billion war supplementary budget. This fund targeted subsidies for the bottom 70% income bracket and established an oil price cap. This massive fiscal intervention came at the right time. The record-breaking export performance of domestic semiconductor giants led to a significant surge in corporate tax collections.
These policies were clearly deployed to boost domestic demand, and they have been effective in increasing consumption. Such fiscal maneuvering is necessary when there is budgetary room, and right now we are seeing strong tax revenues backing these measures.
Consequently, South Korea's consumer price index for April was held at 2.6%, significantly lower than the US and other major economies. On the trade front, the government navigated the Trump administration's strict tariff policies. After 5 months of negotiations, Seoul secured a mutual tariff reduction from 25% to 15% in exchange for a $350 billion investment promise in the U.S. And with all this, the Bank of Korea announced the nation's first quarter economic growth surged to 3.6% on year. 김도현, Arirang News.
Staying with the local economy, a persistent concern for the government is the weak won, as the South Korean currency lost greater ground against the US dollar on this Thursday. Our Kim Jun-hong reports.
The Korean won weakened further against the US dollar on Thursday, with the exchange rate surpassing 1,530 during trading for the first time in more than 2 months. The rate closed at 1,529.71, up 13.31 from the previous session, after opening 13.61 higher at 1,531. The $1 exchange rate has been highly volatile this year amid the Middle East conflict. Thursday's opening marked the weakest start for the Korean won since late March. It was also the first opening above the 1,531 level since the global financial crisis in 2009. Thursday's jump was driven by a mix of external factors, including renewed tensions between the U.S. and Iran and concerns over additional U.S. tariffs. Korea's heavy reliance on imported energy has made it particularly vulnerable to rising oil prices, while a stronger U.S. dollar has added further pressure to the local currency.
The military conflict between the U.S. and Iran boosted demand for safe haven assets. At the same time, soaring natural gas prices in Europe weakened the euro, helping lift the dollar.
Continued foreign outflows from the local stock market has added to the pressure, with investors converting proceeds into dollars before moving funds abroad. Meanwhile, Korea's official foreign reserves declined in May as dollar funds were used to support the foreign exchange market. Reserves stood at $427 billion at the end of the month, down $880 million from April, according to the Bank of Korea on Thursday. The central bank attributed the decline to market stabilization measures, including a swap arrangement with the National Pension Service. As of April, Korea remained the world's 12th largest holder of foreign reserve holdings. Also on Thursday, Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chul stressed the government's readiness to respond to excessive volatility in financial markets. He said the authorities are closely monitoring market conditions as external uncertainties remain high. Kim Jun-hong, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, on the U.S. tariff front, the Trump administration has announced intentions to impose additional tariffs on some 60 trading partners, including South Korea, for alleged unfair business practices. Our Yoon-jin has the latest.
The Trump administration on Tuesday proposed imposing additional tariffs on imports from 60 economies on the basis of a Section 301 unfair trade practices investigation. With 10% imposed on some countries, 45 economies, including South Korea, are facing 12.5% additional duties. The United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer said in a statement that the failure of the U.S.'s trading partners to address the importation of goods made with forced labor was unacceptable, adding that it created unfair competition for U.S. workers. Addressing tariffs implemented last year, the USTR said they were put in place due to an enormous trade deficit, and that unfair trading practices were a driving force for the deficits.
Driving all of these deficits, we believe, among other things, are unfair trading practices. One of these is a tolerance for the import and export of goods made with forced labor. So this is the action where we proposed tariffs last night.
The USTR concluded that Seoul failed to effectively block imports of goods produced through forced labor, and is considered a part of Washington's alternative trade strategy after a recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling invalidated reciprocal tariffs. Following the announcement of additional tariffs, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Wednesday during a committee hearing that Seoul's regulatory treatment of American firms is negatively affecting the two countries' trade relations. He said American companies were facing difficulties in being targeted in Korea, citing Coupang and Meta as examples. In response, the Blue House said it will respond to the USTR's 12.5% tariff by submitting written opinions and attending public hearings. It added that the government had been maintaining close communication with the U.S. and will make every effort to ensure that the balance of interests in existing bilateral tariff agreements is not compromised. The USTR said it would accept public comments on the proposed tariffs and other remedies through July 6th, with a public hearing scheduled for July 7th. 이은진, Arirang News.
In other news now, American and Iranian soldiers have been trading fire over the past few days, but U.S. President Donald Trump insists their ceasefire remains intact with negotiations on track and that the only variable in this reality would be the loss of American lives from Iranian strikes. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung reports.
Despite recent hostilities between the U.S. and Iran, President Donald Trump reportedly insisted on showing that their ceasefire remained intact. According to the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday local time, President Trump has told his aides that he does not intend to resume a full-scale war with Iran unless American military personnel are killed. In fact, he presented the death of U.S. troops as the threshold for terminating the ceasefire, suggesting that he may be willing to tolerate smaller-scale military clashes that fall short of that level. In fact, Trump said on Wednesday that progress in talks with Iran could come within days while talking to reporters at the White House.
I hear the negotiation itself has gone very well, actually. Very well.
Mr. President,
it could happen. I mean, if it happens, and it might not happen, who knows? But if it happens, it could happen like over the weekend.
Trump said that under a deal being discussed with Iran, Washington will get Tehran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium, repeating that the material will be removed from within the Islamic Republic's borders. Meanwhile, Lebanon and Israel have agreed to implement a ceasefire following U.S.-facilitated talks in Washington. The U.S. State Department released a joint statement from all three parties on Wednesday.
The ceasefire is contingent on a complete cessation of Hezbollah fire and the evacuation of all Hezbollah operatives from the South Litani sector.
The two sides agreed to swiftly create pilot zones in which the Lebanese armed forces will take exclusive control of the territory to the exclusion of all non-state actors. Haller added that two parties had no hostile intent toward one another and committed to continuing U.S.-brokered negotiations toward a broader security and peace agreement. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, here on the peninsula, North Korea's Kim Jong-un has reaffirmed his commitment to nuclear weapons and pledged to seek further rapid advancements. Our Lee Seung-jae has details.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has visited a newly launched nuclear material production facility and announced that Pyongyang has finalized plans to strengthen its nuclear forces exponentially. According to the Korean Central News Agency on Thursday, Kim inspected the facility alongside senior ruling party officials, although its location was not disclosed. During the visit, Kim claimed North Korea's capacity to produce weapons-grade nuclear material has more than doubled over the past 5 years under the guidance of the ruling Workers' Party. He praised efforts to implement key party decisions and reaffirmed the North's commitment to expanding its nuclear deterrent both quantitatively and qualitatively. Kim said the growing security environment requires North Korea to accelerate the development of its nuclear capacities. The North Korean leader also revealed that the upcoming 9th Party Congress will adopt a new 5-year plan aimed at further strengthening the nation's nuclear forces. According to Kim, the strategy includes expanding nuclear material production capacity and continuing to increase the number of nuclear weapons in line with decisions already made by the leadership. Emphasizing what he described as North Korea's prolonged confrontation with hostile forces, Kim argued that nuclear weapons remain the fundamental guarantee of the country's sovereignty, security, and right to development. State media also reported that an important consultative meeting on strengthening the nation's nuclear forces was held during the visit. Kim delivered policy guidance on future nuclear activities, saying both tactical and strategic requirements had been fully considered in shaping the country's deterrence strategy. He added that authorities have finalized implementation measures for what he called a massive plan to dramatically expand North Korea's nuclear capabilities, describing the initiative as a historic turning point that will elevate the country's nuclear forces to a new level. Kim concluded by pledging that North Korea would continue to strengthen its ability to defend its constitution, sovereignty, and national security in the years ahead. 이승재, Arirang News.
We saw some rain across parts of the country today. Tomorrow, another round of light rain is expected over central regions and the Jeolla-do provinces from early morning into the late hours. Most areas will see the rain end by morning, though parts of inland and the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province and northern Chungcheongbuk-do provinces could see showers linger into the late morning. Rainfall amounts will be light, with less than 5 millimeters expected in central regions and Jeolla-do provinces. Temperatures will also ease back to seasonal norms over the next several days. Seoul will see highs below the 30-degree mark, returning to what's typical for this time of year. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 18 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 17 degrees, Busan at 19 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 27 degrees, Daegu at 29 degrees, Jeju at 23 degrees. We'll continue to see seasonable early summer weather for the time being. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, so do stay with us, and thank you for now.
Whoever wears the crown must bear its weight. What did the weight of the golden crown mean to the rulers of Jeolla 1500 years ago? When it was first excavated, the golden crown was found flattened and folded into a cone shape, covering the face of the deceased. This dazzling artifact wasn't merely a funerary object placed to guard the tomb, or a true crown that once stood at the very peak of living power. Those who believe it was worn point to its tree-shaped ornaments, arguing that silver was mixed in, allowing the decorations to stand firm without bending. The exact purpose remains unknown, a symbol of royal authority and life, and as a final gesture of respect, being placed over the face to honor him with the highest form of tribute. The gold belt discovered alongside the crown likewise attests to the sacred authority of its wearer. Each shimmering gold plate is etched with symbols of authority. The golden crown and belt hallmarks of Jeolla's golden age and flourishing renaissance still rate an enduring golden presence today. Only those who bore its weight could possess the Shila's crown and belt, a dazzling testament to Shila's enduring legacy.
The Korean lead is drawing more fans from all over the world. Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% rate in April.
Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences. Like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million with its locally developed Yuri rocket.
Arirang.
The Lee Jae-myung administration marks its first anniversary since its inauguration today, and on Press Perspective, we take a look at its achievements as highlighted by the foreign media. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Thursday, June 4th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. President Lee Jae-myung marks 1 year at the top office today, and in light of this occasion, we talk about the progress in diplomacy, defense, economy and culture. For this, I have Michelle Ye-hee Lee, the bureau chief of the Washington Post for Seoul and Tokyo. Michelle, it's been such a long time. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
I also have freelance journalist Rafael Rashid with us. Rafael, it's lovely to have you here.
Good to be back.
Right, Rafael, let's start on the diplomatic front. So President Lee Jae-myung made his diplomatic debut after just 2 weeks at the top office. I believe it was 12 days to be precise. He was invited to G7 summit in Canada, where he also sat down on the sidelines of that summit with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, among other leaders, of course. What was the foreign media's first impression of the new South Korean leader back then?
Sure. So when Lee Jae-myung arrived in Canada, I think we could maybe characterize it as maybe cautious expectations surrounding him at the time. He had just been in office for, as you mentioned, just around 2 weeks. He had no prior experience on the world stage at these major multilateral gatherings, and he was still assembling his team at the time. His foreign policy team, I think, had not even yet been completed. So I think international observers were watching carefully to see whether his government would essentially essentially continue the strategic posture of his predecessor of the Yoon era or signal something genuinely different. But I think what emerged was described by some analysts as a so-called careful recalibration rather than a kind of sharp break from the past. So, of course, Lee did reaffirm the importance of the US alliance as expected. He pushed for trade issues basically at the front and center, and particularly around the, of course, American tariffs on Korean exports. So I think that was read maybe internationally as a slight shift from his predecessor, from the so-called security-first alignment to broader concepts, and of course including national interests, economic sovereignty. Of course, on the sidelines, he did maybe give out a good impression, especially since the US President Trump had to leave early, and as a result, we had these kind of meetings on the sidelines that were able to be materialized. So he met the leaders of Australia, Brazil, Canada, India, Mexico, South Africa, and of course the UK, Sir Keir Starmer. So I think analysts noted that this pointed to maybe a repositioning of South Korea as a kind of connector between the advanced economies and emerging global South, rather than a country that simply follows in Washington's footsteps. So I think, again, this kind of middle power plus kind of responsibility emerged, and I think overall, given the circumstances in which Lee became president, overall I think that was quite well received, especially in the foreign media.
Right. Michelle, as Raphael mentioned, US President Donald Trump left the G7 summit in Canada early, I believe, to tackle tensions between Israel and Iran. That being said, President Lee Jae-myung was not able to hold a sideline summit with Mr. Trump back then. But 2 months later, I believe in late August, President Lee traveled to the White House for his first face-to-face with US President Donald Trump. They met again, I believe, in South Korea late autumn for the APEC meeting. What has been the overall evaluation, if you will, of Mr. Trump, President Lee's and engagements with Mr. Trump?
When President Lee first was elected, Washington really didn't know what to expect from him. I mean, President Lee didn't really have a foreign policy background. It was unclear exactly how he was going to govern. He came from, he comes from the Democratic Party, but is he going to rule like a Democratic president, or is he going to be something else like pragmatic foreign policy, like President Lee kept saying? So there was a big question mark as to how the U.S.-South Korea bilateral relations will go. And there was some concern from Washington, especially because of the conventional idea that a liberal South Korean president tends to be more skeptical of the U.S.-ROK alliance, wants to keep a little distance, be friendlier toward China. So these were sort of the conventional ideas that Washington had. But since then, as you mentioned, the two leaders have met twice. They've developed a decent rapport. It seems like they've developed a good personal background together, at least talking and connecting over shared interests or shared experiences, like both surviving an assassination attempt. I know President Trump was very interested in his hearing about President Lee's experience and connecting on that human level. And also on a security front, there are issues that are gelling quite well between the two leaders in a way that we didn't quite expect. For example, President Trump really appreciates that South Korea wants to take a greater role in shipbuilding and working with the U.S. on that. And the U.S. definitely needs South Korea's help, and President Trump knows that and is amenable to working with the Lee administration on that front. The U.S. has also appreciated South Korea raising its defense spending target, which we know is a big deal for the Trump administration. And President Lee has also agreed to take greater responsibility for defense on the peninsula through what they're calling alliance modernization and strategic flexibility. So these efforts have definitely been appreciated by Washington. I think the massive gold crown that President Lee gave to President Trump definitely made an impression, and President Trump was happy about that. But I think, we can't ignore the other issues that still are bubbling under the surface of these good feelings. There are still tariff issues to figure out. The coupon issue still is looming large between the two countries. the investment deal that South Korea has agreed to, but is still kind of going at a slower pace than Washington wants. So I think the alliance now is probably at a better place than Washington possibly would have expected under a new liberal president, but there are still many issues that they need to hammer out. But for the first year, I think it is at a surprisingly more stable place than we thought it would be.
Right. And before traveling to the U.S. to sit down with U.S. President Donald Trump, Rafael, President Lee Jae-myung's first overseas trip for a bilateral summit was in fact neighboring Japan to meet with then Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. How has that unprecedented diplomatic decision served to promote Seoul-Tokyo ties under the Lee and Takaichi administrations?
Sure. I think the decision to make Japan the first bilateral destination was in itself the story. No South Korean president had done so since the two countries had established diplomatic relations in 1965. And I think that symbolism was unmistakable, especially when we all saw it happening. Particularly given that Lee Jae-myung, especially before becoming president, had previously criticized trilateral cooperation with Tokyo and Washington. So I think that choice sent a clear signal that something had shifted. And as Michelle just mentioned, even with the US or with President Trump, I think there were many people were wondering, how is he going to deal with the US? How is he going to deal with Japan, given the traditional way things have always been done? So I think that shift was particularly noted. The August 2025 summit with the then Prime Minister Ishiba in Tokyo produced the first joint statement between two countries, the first one in 17 years. The tone of the meeting, the kind of interactions was, I think, warm, friendly. Lee described Japan and South Korea as optimal partners at the time, and that he said that after just his second meeting with Ishiba, he felt that the two had become close friends. And the two agreed to resume shuttle diplomacy, which of course has materialized cooperation on hydrogen and AI, and also joint framework on pending kind of issues, demographic issues between the two countries that they share, and maybe kind of share some insights and try to resolve these problems facing the two countries together. So I think there was definitely that momentum. And again, there was a little fear that after Ishiba left, what's going to happen? Will that momentum continue? Sanae Takaichi, of course, becomes the new leader, and despite these initial concerns, and also given her reputation at the time as a kind of right-wing, maybe security hawk, maybe something might happen in this relationship. But fast forward to today, and Lee and Takaichi have met, I believe it's 4 times within a 6 months period, up until last month, of course. And the two have also visited each other's hometowns. Again, that is quite unprecedented. Their most recent visit in Andong last month, they focused on the energy supply chain issues, especially given what's going on in the Middle East. And so I think analysts describe the current state of the kind of relationship as healthy, without any maybe sticking points, major sticking points on the table. I think the approach that Lee has taken over the past year has been, of course, separating these historical grievances, these disputes that we've seen time and time again. He's been separating that from cooperation that we're seeing now and future cooperation. But of course, some people might say that these historical grievances could come up in the future at any time. But I think definitely Lee has tried his best to keep these on 2 separate tracks.
Right, indeed. Michelle, with regard to defense, South Korea's priority, of course, as we all know, lies on peace and security here on the Korean Peninsula. That being said, there are a number of pundits who believe that the Lee Jae-myung administration appears to be opting for dialogue over deterrence with regard to North Korea. What are the prospects of this kind of engagement, and what has been the response to the shift in stance, if you will?
Yeah, well, it's clear that North Korea is uninterested in dialogue right now. So it's a difficult position to be in for any other world leader that's interested in engaging with North Korea. Certainly the Lee Jae-myung administration appears to be actually trying to balance dialogue with deterrence. President Lee wants to engage with North Korea, but at the same time, the South Korea is participating in, for example, joint military drills with the U.S., which North Korea views as a very hostile act. And it is an act of, deterrence from the U.S. ROK alliance standpoint. And if Lee Jae-myung really wanted to abandon that, he would stop those drills or, try to scale them back or something. But we haven't seen that happen yet. So I see more of a push and pull there about trying to find that right balance between those two. But Kim Jong-un, North Korean leader, and his powerful sister Kim Yo-jong have both said multiple times they're not interested in engaging with South Korea. North Korea has formally abandoned its reunification policy with the South. It's declared South Korea an enemy state. So how do you engage with a country like that, especially since South Korea still considers North and South both one nation? President Lee knows this. President Trump certainly knows this. Other leaders in the Asia-Pacific region and beyond know this about this complicated and difficult moment in terms of trying to engage North Korea. And President Trump also similarly wants to engage with Kim Jong-un, but also has not gotten a meaningful response. So the U.S. is trying to, push both the dialogue and deterrence as well. The ball is in North Korea's court, and it has been for many years. And that's just the reality. And North Korea has drawn closer to Russia in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine and has found a powerful partner in Putin. And Seoul wants peaceful coexistence, but Pyongyang is not interested in that at all. So I think there is a broad recognition about these dynamics and just how much one leader, especially from South Korea, can do to change these dynamics. There's very little that can be done. And President Lee appears to be trying to find what he can push within those very limited boundaries in his first year.
Especially keeping in mind, of course, the cliche, it takes two to tango, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, if President Lee wants to talk, but the other person doesn't want to talk, then that's not a dialogue. That's just yelling at a person who's not interested in you.
Indeed, indeed. Raphael, beyond diplomacy and defense, how do you suppose has the Lee Jae-myung administration's policies served to support South Korea's stock market as well as its stellar exports?
Sure. I mean, I think the numbers themselves are quite impressive. South Korean exports rose 53.2% year-on-year in May, the strongest annual rate in over 4 decades, driven above all, of course, by semiconductors, which jumped 169% in a single month to a record high of just over $37 billion. If we again look at the KOSPI stock index, which stood at around 2,770 when Lee Jae-myung took office, and now it's broken past, well past 8,000, making it one of the best performing markets around the world over the past year. I guess the big question is how much of this is government policy versus maybe a global semiconductor boom that would have anyway happened regardless of where Korea is. This AI-driven surge in demand for memory chips, of course, has been a powerful tailwind that no president can be, I think, fully credited for. But the administration itself, I think, has made some deliberate moves to support the market environment overall. Early on in his term, Lee Jae-myung pushed through reforms to corporate governance law, expanding directors' duties to shareholders and also tackling long-standing undervaluation of Korean stocks that many have been complaining about for quite a few years, the so-called Korea discount effect. The government also launched a stimulus budget package of just over 31 trillion won. I think that was within the first months in office to help revive domestic demand after, of course, political turmoil of the previous year. Of course, Korean analysts themselves have raised some concerns that some sectors might surge, of course, the semiconductors, while others are left behind. So again, if you strip out the semiconductors, manufacturing growth in the first quarter was just 0.2%. We also have other issues. Youth unemployment remains relatively high. Small businesses and service sectors are continuing to struggle, and the $1 exchange rate isn't doing very great either. It's quite high at the moment. So I think we have these kind of big, grand headline figures, and I think they are impressive, but the administration knows that the kind of so-called growth story is still ongoing and has yet to reach basically everyone in the country.
All right, which is why the president, of course, last week, I believe, pledged to ensure that the second year of his term will be dedicated to ensuring tangible improvements for ordinary Koreans. With regard to exports, Michelle, those of creative goods, I believe, hit a record $14.9 billion last year. And the administration has pledged to promote South Korea into a tangible cultural powerhouse. What do you suppose are the broader implications of this pledge?
Well, I think that's interesting because really the growth of K-Wave has been driven by private industry, the entrepreneurs and the creators who have made this boom happen globally. In fact, there have been moments where the South Korean government, blacklisted certain creators because they were in dispute with the creative industry. But despite that, K-drama, K-music, K-pop, K-movies, K-beauty, all of that has grown, boomed around the world. I think now the Lee government wants to really promote this and be more strategic about it. For example, I'm seeing a lot of focus on K-food as the next K export. But there is also only so much that the government can do to try to make culture as a national export item. That means that there has to be a receptive audience on the other end. And right now there is a wave of interest, much interest. I mean, just being at the BTS concert and seeing all those fans coming recently showed, Rafael and me that, this interest is certainly global and growing and very passionate. But, that's only so much that the government actually can do to try to grow that and to try to stimulate that. Culture products, however, can be promising for the South Korean economy more broadly. There are fewer volatilities like exposure to supply chain issues or tariff issues. It's not perfect because we know that, for example, the K-beauty industry was affected by tariffs. K-beauty industry is already affected by the war in Iran and the plastic supply chain issues that have been created by that. So it's not a perfect solution, but it is an additive to the South Korean export market that is a big area of growth right now. But I think we have to be clear that even though it is an asset, it will not replace South Korea's major export powerhouses like the actual manufacturing industry. But as an additive to the economic growth, I think it makes sense as a government, focus, because it's an opportunity that the government could try to push and try to make way for, maybe through regulation or other promotion.
All right. For now, of course, as you said and as Rafael mentioned, it's chips and cars, of course, and hopefully they're trying to make sure that culture takes a greater presence as well. Rafael, I believe we have about a minute or two left. This next question is about, it's beyond foreign policies and domestic policies. It's actually about the administration's attempts to better interact with the public, specifically speaking, the foreign media. The administration claims it has sought to maintain a productive channel of communication with members of the foreign media. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that if you compare it to the previous administration, I think the contrast is quite apparent. Under the predecessor, Yoon Suk-yeol, kind of access was maybe limited to press conferences. Engagement with media was relatively, not so much of it happened, but then over the past year, Lee Jae-myung has tried to improve this communication. We've had, I think, 4 press conferences already. There's going to be another one next week. He has also been, I think, even physically more close to the journalists sitting right among us at the press conferences. And also the live streaming of the cabinet meetings has also been something quite different. So I think overall the kind of communication between the presidential office and media, and also foreign media, has been quite I think it's been refreshing.
Right. He's also been quite active on his social media platform, right?
Sometimes difficult to follow.
Right. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition. Raphael, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Michelle, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right. That ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.
What's the NZ generation talking about these days?